The first time I realized how little respect I truly commanded in my own family. I sat quietly in my study, the will spread out before me, my hands trembling not with fear, but with disbelief. My daughter-in-law, Emily, had tried to erase me from the life I had spent decades building, even going so far as to call me confused in front of others, as if my years of experience were meaningless. She believed I wouldn't notice. She assumed I lacked the awareness to see through her schemes. She was wrong. Dead wrong. I remember the moment vividly. My eldest son, David, sitting across from me, avoiding eye contact. "Mom, I think Emily was trying to make changes without telling you," he stammered. The betrayal was shocking, cutting deeper than I expected. A lifetime of trust, subtly chipped away by one person's greed and manipulation. I leaned back in my chair, taking a slow breath, forcing myself to remain composed. Panic wouldn't help me now. Clarity would. I needed to observe, calculate, and act with precision. It wasn't just about money. It was about dignity, control, and finally showing them that betrayal has consequences. I looked over the documents carefully, noting the lines Emily had tried to alter. One phrase, one single line, could change everything. My mind raced how many other manipulations had occurred under the guise of familial care. Every smile, every helpful suggestion I had accepted without question now seemed suspect. Their arrogance, their assumption that I was oblivious, became my advantage. I knew this had to be done cleverly. This wasn't about confrontation. I had learned over the years that subtlety and patience yield far greater results than rash action. I started tracing every transaction, revisiting every document, quietly gathering information. Each detail, each slight discrepancy in behavior or wording, added a piece to the puzzle of their betrayal. My mind sharpened with every observation, every thought forming the blueprint of my eventual success. Then, as I sat staring at the evening sky outside my window, I decided it was time to engage my audience not in reality, but in imagination. As if I were telling this story to those who would follow every step. Where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below, I whispered to myself, picturing viewers captivated by the unfolding drama. Could they imagine what it felt like to be betrayed by those closest to you? To realize that every gesture of kindness might have been a calculated act. The emotional sting of betrayal cut deep, but beneath it, a spark ignited. I was no longer the passive woman they believed I was. I would reclaim control, piece by piece, using intellect, patience, and precision. Emily thought she could manipulate me. She thought she had power. She hadn't accounted for my resilience, my sharpness, my unwavering resolve. The game had begun, and I was already several moves ahead. The day after discovering Emily's betrayal, I forced myself to act normally. To anyone watching, I was calm, composed, even polite. But inside, my mind raced, analyzing every interaction, every phrase, every gesture that could reveal hidden intentions. Emily had underestimated me, assuming my age or my patience would make me passive. She had no idea that my quiet observation had begun. Each detail cataloged, each misstep noted. I started with small interactions, casual phone calls, dinners, and errands, all while observing her behavior. Every hesitation in her voice, every forced smile, every careless word was a clue. She had been subtle, clever, and manipulative, but I was patient, sharp, and relentless. Her assumption that I would not notice the changes she had tried to make in the will only fueled my determination. Late one evening, I reviewed the documents she had attempted to alter. My fingers traced the lines carefully, noting which words had been added, which phrases she had tried to erase. One line in particular caught my attention, a single, seemingly insignificant phrase that could nullify her entire plan if changed back or clarified. The realization was thrilling. I didn't need confrontation. I needed precision, strategy, and timing. While planning, I reconnected with trusted contacts lawyers, financial advisors, and colleagues I had known for years. I didn't tell them the story outright. I only asked questions, verifying facts, reviewing records, and quietly preparing my leverage. Each conversation added clarity. Each document provided insight. It was meticulous work, silent but powerful, and I relished every calculated move. Emily tried to act confidently, inviting me to lunches and casual family gatherings, as if nothing had happened. I accepted politely, all the while observing. Every glance, every word, every minor slip was stored mentally, ready to be used at the right moment. Her overconfidence, her arrogance, her assumption that I lacked awareness it was my advantage. Each time she smiled and tried to charm others, I analyzed her tactics, predicting her next move. One evening, David called me, a hint of uncertainty in his voice. "Mom, are you sure you're okay?" Emily's been pushing some decisions lately. I smiled quietly, hiding my satisfaction. He still didn't understand that my calm wasn't a weakness. I had begun to turn betrayal into a game of intelligence, using observation, patience, and strategy. Each subtle action I took brought me closer to reclaiming control, to protecting what was rightfully mine, and to teaching them that manipulation and deceit have consequences. By the end of the week, I had a plan forming, not reckless, not confrontational, but precise, intelligent, and unstoppable. I wasn't reacting to their actions. I was anticipating them, orchestrating consequences, and quietly setting the stage for the day they would realize that their assumptions had been their undoing. The first moves had been made, and the ripple of quiet, clever revenge was already beginning. Weeks passed quietly, but beneath the calm, my plan was already in motion. Emily believed her manipulation was invisible, that I was too distracted or too polite to notice. She couldn't have been more wrong. Every smile, conversation, and attempt to charm or intimidate me was meticulously analyzed. My mind worked like a chessboard. Each word and gesture a piece to be played at exactly the right moment. One afternoon, Emily sent a casual message. "Mom, I just finalized some updates in the will. I hope you understand everything. Don't get confused, that tiny." Arrogant note meant to belittle me was the opening I had been waiting for. She assumed I wouldn't read it carefully, wouldn't notice the subtle changes she inserted. But I had. Every word, every phrase, every alteration was recorded in my mind. I contacted my trusted attorney quietly. No confrontation. No accusation, just questions, verification, and confirming the potential leverage in the documents. One careful adjustment could undo months of manipulation and shift the balance entirely in my favor. In front of my family, I maintained composure. Emily smiled, David nodded, and the world believed I remained oblivious. But inside, I calculated every slip of confidence, every hint of greed. Their arrogance had become my strongest weapon. The first subtle consequence appeared that evening. I referenced a minor financial detail during a family discussion, something Emily thought I hadn't noticed. Her barely perceptible flicker of panic told me everything. My first move had landed. I hadn't shouted, I hadn't confronted, yet the ripple had begun. The tension, the realization that I was aware, was visible. That night, I reviewed everything again, tracing potential moves and countermoves. The thrill wasn't revenge itself. It was the intelligence, precision, and patience that had brought me here. Emily had underestimated me, and now the first evidence of her mistake was visible. Every subtle interaction was leading to a moment of undeniable empowerment. By the end of the week, I knew the next steps would be more dramatic and precise. The seeds of clever revenge had been planted. They thought they controlled the narrative, but in reality, every move they made guided them into the outcome I had already envisioned. Betrayal had taught me resilience, strategy, and now, quietly, I was turning it into triumph. The week after my first strategic move, I noticed the subtle changes in their behavior. Emily's confident facade wavered slightly in casual conversations, her forced smiles not quite reaching her eyes. David's hesitation, once masked by polite concern, became more noticeable. I observed them quietly, noting every slip, every micro-expression. Their underestimation of me had become my advantage. I decided it was time for another calculated step. I invited Emily to discuss a minor matter related to the house. She came in, polite and smiling, expecting me to remain passive. I spoke calmly, referencing details she assumed I had overlooked. Her hands tightened slightly, a small tremor of panic passing through her gestures. That was all I needed. I didn't need to raise my voice or accuse her. The tension itself spoke volumes. Meanwhile, I began subtly gathering external support. Trusted friends, colleagues, and legal advisors were quietly informed about the discrepancies I had discovered. I didn't reveal everything, just enough to validate the careful measures I had already taken. Their confidence was fragile, and each conversation, each observation, added to my growing leverage. I watched as the first ripple of unease spread. During a family dinner, I carefully brought up a minor financial topic. Almost casually, almost innocently. Emily reacted immediately, a flicker of panic crossing her face. David tried to cover, but the subtle cracks were already visible. The ripple had begun. My calm, measured approach contrasted sharply with the growing tension around the table. Each word I chose, each glance I made, was part of a larger strategy, a silent orchestration of consequences that would soon become undeniable. At night, I reviewed every interaction, every subtle reaction. I mapped potential next steps, calculated likely responses, and imagined the eventual outcome. The thrill wasn't in confrontation, it was in intelligence, in precision, in watching the game unfold exactly as I had planned. The first ripple of clever, nonviolent revenge was visible, and it was intoxicating. By the end of the week, it was clear the family dynamic had shifted. Ever so slightly, yet perceptibly, Emily and David were no longer fully confident. The air of certainty they had taken for granted was now tinged with unease. I smiled quietly, knowing that patience, observation, and strategy were winning the first rounds. Betrayal had taught me much, but it had also revealed the tools I needed to reclaim control. Step by step, without ever raising my voice, subtle tension I had created in the household now began to spread beyond my immediate observations. Emily's nervousness grew in front of others, her forced smiles faltering when I mentioned minor details from documents she assumed I hadn't seen. David, torn between loyalty and fear, started second-guessing decisions he had once made confidently. Their overconfidence, their arrogance, and their assumption that I was unaware had become my greatest tools. I continued working behind the scenes, quietly gathering information, verifying every detail with my attorney, and ensuring that every subtle move I had planned would yield maximum impact. The thrill wasn't in confrontation, it was in precision, in the anticipation of watching my careful strategies unfold. Each overlooked clause, each small mistake they had made, now became leverage for a broader, more powerful ripple effect. During a casual family gathering, I mentioned a seemingly trivial investment, detail phrased casually as though it were mere conversation. Emily's reaction was instantaneux à micro-expression of panic flashed across her face before she regained composure. David tried to intervene, but the ripple of tension had already spread. I smiled quietly, knowing that patience and subtlety were more powerful than anger or rash action. At night, I reflected on the unfolding events, mapping out the next series of moves. Every conversation, every observation, every detail collected over months contributed to a clear plan. The first ripple had become a wave touching every corner of the household. Emily and David were beginning to realize silently that their manipulation had consequences far beyond their expectations. I even imagined my viewers following this story as I had envisioned. Where are you watching from today? Drop your city in the comments below. Or tell me, have you ever faced someone trying to outsmart you in your own home? The thought of engagement, of connecting with others who could relate to betrayal and strategy, added a new layer to my satisfaction. By the end of the week, the ripple had expanded significantly. The family dynamic had shifted. Subtle cracks appeared in their once confident facade. Emily's attempts to manipulate or assert control were now met with calm observation, careful questioning, and strategic silence. It didn't need to raise my voice. My intelligence and patience were doing all the work. The power of observation, the leverage of knowledge, and the thrill of strategy became my constant companions. Each move was deliberate, each reaction noted, each subtle advantage savored. Revenge, I realized, wasn't about anger, it was about precision, patience, and the quiet, undeniable triumph of being several steps ahead. And with every ripple, my eventual, clever victory drew closer. By now, the tension in the household was palpable. Emily's forced confidence had been replaced by subtle hesitations. David's once assured decisions wavered under the weight of unseen consequences. I observed silently, noting every slip, every tiny panic, every misstep. Their belief that I was unaware or weak had crumbled, and that realization gave me a quiet thrill. I decided it was time to escalate. One evening, I organized a casual meeting under the guise of discussing a minor family matter. Emily arrived, her smile brittle, her eyes betraying the unease she tried to conceal. I spoke calmly, referencing minor financial details and subtle legal points she had overlooked. Her reactions were immediate, a flicker of panic, a hesitation in her speech, but I didn't let her see that I had noticed everything. At the same time, I quietly shared select information with trusted colleagues and advisors, creating a network of validation that strengthened my position. I didn't confront them openly. Instead, I let the pressure of knowledge, awareness, and preparedness ripple through their actions. Every careless assumption, every small act of manipulation became part of the leverage I held. The next days were a delicate dance. I continued to engage in ordinary family interactions while simultaneously preparing the final moves. Each document, each clause, each observation became a piece of the larger strategy. Emily's anxiety grew with every minor reference I made, each carefully worded sentence reinforcing the fact that her attempts at deception were failing. David, caught between loyalty and fear, began questioning past decisions, unsure of how much I truly knew. Then came the subtle revelation. I discovered a minor loophole in a document she had tried to manipulate, one that gave me precise control over a significant portion of assets. The discovery didn't require confrontation. It required patience, observation, and clever use of the law. My pulse quickened not from anger, but from the exhilarating knowledge that every calculated move had brought me here, to the edge of triumph. I began to implement the next phase quietly. Each subtle correction, each precise adjustment, each carefully timed remark reinforced the unfolding consequences. Emily's subtle panic became more frequent, David's uncertainty more apparent. The ripple I had started weeks ago had grown into a current, flowing steadily, inevitably, toward the ultimate outcome. Late at night, I reflected on the escalating tension. Betrayal had once caused me pain, but now it had sharpened my mind, heightened my awareness, and revealed the thrill of strategy. Revenge was no longer a distant thought, it was a living, breathing process unfolding with every observation, every subtle action, and every calculated step. By the end of the week, the escalation was undeniable. The household atmosphere had shifted. Confidence had been replaced by subtle fear. Arrogance had been replaced by hesitation, and my quiet, clever plan was moving inexorably toward its ultimate resolution. The moment I had been patiently planning for months finally arrived. Every subtle move, every careful observation, every calculated interaction had led to this day. Emily's attempts to manipulate, to erase me from the will, had crumbled without her even realizing it. The tiny changes she had inserted, meant to secure her control, now worked entirely against her. I summoned David and Emily under the pretense of reviewing minor family matters. The atmosphere was calm, almost casual, but I felt the quiet anticipation of a storm about to break. I reviewed the documents slowly, deliberately, emphasizing the clauses they had assumed I hadn't noticed. Emily's face paled slightly. David's nervous glances betrayed the tension that had been quietly building for weeks. I didn't need to raise my voice. My calm, composed presence, combined with the undeniable evidence, was enough. One by one, I revealed the precise corrections. I had made subtle legal adjustments that ensured their greed and deception had consequences. They couldn't argue. They couldn't manipulate their way out. The documents reflected my intelligence, my patience, and my careful orchestration. Each clause, each correction, was a testament to the fact that underestimating me had been their gravest mistake. I watched as the reality settled in. Emily's smug confidence had vanished, replaced by silent panic. David's uncertainty became visible, a reflection of the cracks my strategic patience had created. The ripple of tension, which had begun weeks ago with small observations and subtle maneuvers, now became a wave of undeniable consequence. Their actions, once intended to harm me, had backfired spectacularly. I felt a quiet satisfaction not from anger, but from empowerment. This was clever, patient, nonviolent revenge, precise, calculated, and psychologically satisfying. My dignity, my foresight, and my intelligence had triumphed over deception and betrayal. I realized that patience, observation, and strategic thinking were more powerful than confrontation or aggression. Later that evening, I reflected on the journey. Betrayal had once brought pain, but it had also revealed my strength, resilience, and the thrill of clever strategy. I had turned manipulation into a lesson, greed into a tool, and betrayal into empowerment. The calm triumph was more satisfying than any dramatic confrontation could have been. As I looked out over the quiet city lights, I thought of those watching my story, imagining them captivated by the suspense, the clever maneuvers, and the ultimate empowerment. Until next time, see you in the next video.